two reasons. I'll turn it over to Stonely.
Sure. Thanks, Abby.
Sure.
First of all, thank you, very deeply, Abby, for including me yet again in this this adventure. This class is very much an adventure. I'm very excited and grateful for you all for choosing to join us on it. I think this class is really important because we are uniquely looking at an intersection of urban challenges, which a lot of groups and classes look at, but we're particularly focused on understanding the problems and deriving unique new solutions, potential solutions to those problems through private market mechanisms. Most people, when they're looking at urban challenges, tend to draw a line to policy or nonprofit activity that might solve some of our broader urban challenges. And when they think about private market solutions, it tends to be, well, what can we sell to the city? And while that is sometimes a valid and sometimes very lucrative approach to solving some of these challenges, the city isn't always just a customer or the customer. We're going to look at other business models and distribution channels that can derive broad public benefits while selling and distributing private goods, private benefits. But the city does still play a very important role even when they're not the customer. Almost every company at scale ends up running into the federal government, passed your taxes. And a lot of the newer cohort of companies that are finding interesting business opportunities are realizing that a lot of the low-hanging fruit is gone on new businesses, and the more interesting opportunities now tend to be things that are in regulated industries, locally regulated often. And so the city becomes relevant at a certain point of scale when you're dealing in a regulated industry, or something that they hadn't thought of the regulations around that industry in 50 years. And now that there's this hotshot new startup doing things in a way that is upsetting the entrenched interests, we have to rethink our regulations and our policy. The good news is that this has happened enough times over the last decade that there's a more proactive movement around thinking about the future, or the present regulations and the future of technology, and how local government, federal government should get ahead of the technology that's in the pipeline. But startups have the opportunity to work with regulators to understand how they're currently thinking about the future of policy and help shape that policy. Another interesting intersection with cities is that when you're building a company that's solving a problem that obviously or hopefully is a lucrative private market solution that's deriving profits, but along the way is also creating this very broad public benefit. And in those scenarios, you tend to end up caring about the same things that the city cares about. You're trying to move the same needles that the city wants to move, like safety, like education, resources, efficiency, etc. And in those scenarios, the city can sometimes find themselves with a vested interest in your success. So even though you're not selling anything to the city, they may be an ideal partner for things like marketing and awareness around what you're doing. One of the companies that we work with sells one of the most popular smart irrigation controllers, and they're a top-rated product on Amazon, in Home Depot, etc. And as it turns out, over the last 2 years that they've been around selling these units, building a very fast-growing company, they've also tracked over 3 billion gallons of water saved through their system. And when you look at a city that's planning to do a multi-billion-dollar irrigation project for the purpose of creating new supply for a few million gallons of water, this sort of thing clicks as an aligned interest, where as opposed to investing untold dollars into creating new capacity, can we partner with a startup, with a company that has a successful product that's helping to reduce the demand side of the equation? And so Another obvious example is the fact that the city can be sometimes the optimal customer. Sometimes the interest is so aligned that, and sometimes just the fact that the only route to the direct outcome that your company is seeking to achieve is through the city. They hold the keys, so to speak. And there are examples abound. You're going to meet a number of startups actually over the course of this quarter that have decided to sell to cities, maybe not even as their first approach. They've ended up there and have found a lot of success being there. So the other thing that we won't touch on this too much, but some of the founders that you'll meet will share what they found as enablers, and the reason why we're finding more and more startups that are interested in founders, entrepreneurs that are interested in solving these sorts of problems is because there is more support for this type of endeavor. And by support, that means not only funding investors like Urban Us that are not afraid of a company that's interested in selling to government, or not afraid of a company that is interested in solving a societal problem, or building a hardware gadget that creates efficiency. That's very important. Funding is important, but often what's just as, if not more important than funding, are things like knowledge sharing, learning from each other's mistakes, getting ahead of, like I mentioned before, things like policy changes on the horizon, but also sharing relationships and sharing potential customers, sharing successes from one city to another. And so what we've done while we've been building our practice, our fund over the last few years, has been to build up this ecosystem of founders helping each other, cities working with founders, and investors that are also interested in investing across this thesis. And so we very much believe in that sort of knowledge and relationship sharing. Hopefully that translates into this class. We're going to encourage you to comment and give each other feedback on your ideas and on the research that you find. One tool that we'll introduce in the homework, I think of next week, is a tool where we'll be able to annotate and comment the different articles that you find on the web and highlight things, so we'll be able to aggregate all of our findings on the web around the problems that we want to solve. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about Urban Us, my fund, and our perspective around this space, why we think this is important, that there is an ecosystem around this, that there are funders, that there is a course like this that can encourage hopefully some of you to start these sorts of companies or to join companies that are working in this space, or if you're going to the public sector, to be more enthusiastic about working with private companies and solving these problems. And I'll talk a bit about our history and how we approach investing in the space, and why we feel that startups and the emerging enablers have been so has had such strong growth over the last few years. And I'll share a few examples from our portfolio of some exciting companies, some of which are going to meet over the course of the next few weeks, but some of my favorites from our portfolio. So if you've ever seen Elon Musk do a product launch, you're probably familiar with the first minute or at least half a minute of any one of his product launches. It's a short speech on climate change. You don't get to see the shiny new car or the fancy new roof until he tells you about the fact that CO2 emissions are rising, sea levels are rising, and the only solution, a large part of the solution to this challenge is sustainable transport. Now Tesla is not a transportation company, it's an energy company, so sustainable energy. And so you could say we're along the same school of thought in feeling like the challenges that we face in the environment are existential, and they're particularly interesting because we're at a time when we are recognizing the impact. At least the scientific community has a consensus. Now the global political community has a consensus that there is a direct impact that human beings are having on the environment. A lot of it correlates to the development of of how we use energy, but also related to how fast we're growing as a population. And now that we've gotten serious about things like CO2 emissions, we're also facing another mega trend, which is the growth of cities that happens to have a very weird relationship with the environment, a very interesting relationship, an intimate relationship with the environment. So over the next 10, 15 years, we have the goal of cutting our emissions down 50% back to where we were in the 1990s. But this is at a time when the growth of cities, as Abby highlighted earlier, we're now at 50% of global population living in urban centers. And over the course of the next few decades, you'll see this over and over again repeated in your reading. We'll get to somewhere around 70%. This could either be a good thing or a bad thing. Right? It could be a good thing because with density, with the right sort of density, you can actually increase efficiency and decrease the carbon footprint of an individual. But it could also be a bad thing because if you do it wrong, you can get some really nasty scenarios of not only CO2 emissions, but the crowdedness of cities creates a whole host of other challenges if you don't get efficiency right. But there's the other sneaky challenge, which is that the changes in climate, the effects of climate change directly impact cities more than anywhere else, where 90% of cities are coastal cities. The number of trillion-dollar climate disasters has been steadily climbing over the last few decades. We tend to think about there's the adage that cities are the cause of climate change, but also the answer to climate change. Cities are the number 4 contributor to CO2 emissions. Most of it is inefficient energy use in buildings, carbon emission from transportation, but also how we manage food and waste. And so you think about all of the things that are sort of challenges in the city, and what we're going to learn today is turning a challenge into a challenge statement where you have a defined goal of solving that problem. And some of the challenges that we identified early on in launching our fund were things like reducing traffic congestion, making buildings more efficient, a few of the things that I just highlighted. But what we did, after looking at, here are the problems that we think are interesting to solve, because if you don't solve these problems, everything else gets a lot harder. And here are the challenges. The goals are ambitious, the demand is higher, and the resources, as Abby pointed out earlier, the resources are getting tighter. Cities have less and less money. And so we organized it as a sort of a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is that no urban challenge is less valuable than another, and you'll realize over the course of this quarter that there's almost nothing that doesn't touch urban, right? People living in cities means that almost every aspect of your life now is an urban challenge. But there are certain things that are sort of lower level Maslow hierarchy of needs, things that people tend to ignore or forget about, like what happens to your waste when you recycle it or you don't recycle it. Where's your water coming from? How clean is your water? But there are the things that when something goes wrong, everybody pays attention, because the other things higher up in the hierarchy of needs break down. And this is not a full capturing of the hierarchy of challenges in cities. We miss a lot of things that are things like education, childcare, etc. I mean, again, cities are just a massive platform of opportunities, and by opportunities I mean challenges that have very interesting solutions just on the horizon, and they're all very important to solve. We tend to focus lower on the hierarchy of needs, and because we feel like these things aren't getting all of the sort of support that they should. Like, we think that these problems are really serious. Like I said, when these things go wrong, everything else sort of is off the table. And thinking about it from a policy level and setting ambitious goals, like capping carbon emissions, and having a discussion about making a decision to form a committee that's going to make a decision, or whatever, right? All the while, the world is cooking, right? Or people are being stuffed in the buildings and drinking unsafe water, and all of the disaster scenarios that we're seeing more and more of every year is happening while there's wonkiness. Very small aside, the part of the motivation around doing this fund and having such a passion about this thesis is, we have our own lives, which are, if you understand sort of medical technology, we're likely going to live longer lives than our parents did. We have our children and our children's children in the world that they're growing up in and are going to spend a long time in. And so some of the things that the folks that are, at these committee meetings only have a certain horizon that they really care about, whereas we're at a unique age where we're already going to start feeling the effects of urban challenges, and that it's just going to get more serious. Our children, our children's children are going to have, can either have very interesting and fulfilling and rewarding lives, because if we get urban right, people are more connected to each other. We have more a more balanced relationship with the environment. I mean, it can be a very beautiful thing, but if we get it wrong, it can be a very disastrous thing. And so leaving that up to sort of 50 years down the line, we'll see if some policy decision worked. While those things are important, we're also seeing that startups can have a huge impact on bringing new things into the world very quickly. Now, some of those things have secondary and third tertiary effects that aren't great either. But some of them sneak in very broad public benefits into the world through very rapid private market growth. And so we look for those startups. We started looking for those startups 3 years ago. Along the way, we also met more and more other funders, policy experts that can help us understand the other side of the table, city officials that were looking to partner with startups, partners in academia, et cetera. And we've been building up this network and this ecosystem of people helping startups solve some of these challenges. And but we're not doing it, purely for altruistic reasons. Though I probably might have convinced you of that. We very much believe in a dual benefit of having a profit motive that's tied and tethered to a public benefit. And so we very much believe that this is a very high potential investment class, and that will compete, if not beat, other investment VCs. And we can discuss that. We're going to touch a lot of, and you'll see this in the founders that you're going to meet. I mean, these are just phenomenal, brilliant people who have simultaneously realized that they could maximize their earning potential by starting companies solving problems that represent very massive market opportunities, but they also care deeply about solving very important societal challenges. And it's a unique person that decides to go down that path in life. And so particularly for our fund, we have certain criteria. Again, the goal is to find the highest potential opportunities to return an investment on our fund. We won't go too much into fund dynamics, but one of the ways that we correlate market growth to solving urban challenges is, does this problem, can this problem be solved in 100 cities or more in a short period of time? Which, Uber was one of the first few companies to have that sort of, 100 cities in 5 years level of growth, and now it happens more and more frequently. We believe that, having a company that's clearly growing but also has a mission also increases the opportunity for you to attract and retain talent, which the Bay Area, that's really challenging. Pretty much the best talent, it tends to be harder to find. You can go to nascent sort of cities and find underutilized resources, which is something we'll talk about a little bit. But for the most part, having a mission can actually be a competitive advantage. And of course, again, we want to find solutions that can directly help local government, city agencies, but we're also very excited and interested in solutions that can be sold to businesses, that can be sold to consumers, that can package in broader public benefits. And if the company succeeds in one area, it can become a larger company. It's not just the team is being built out to capture and grow, as Abby pointed before, grow from being a small experiment to being a large firm. Yeah, so a few examples of that is that both the impact potential of a fast-growing company in the urban landscape, you know, bike shares and subways took a while to permeate throughout cities, and Uber showed up just like that. It's in almost every city, and it also represents, you know, billions and billions of dollars of market value that they've created. And examples in energy, when you look at Nest and Solar City, and another example in transportation when you look at Waze, which is crowdsourcing, you know, drivers' awareness of road conditions to create this real-time map of road conditions and traffic and congestion. Again, imagine one city trying to figure this out for themselves, let alone propagating that to 100 cities.
Or think of Google. Remember Google driving around
Right.
and photographing every street?
Right.
And then Waze comes along and crowdsources it.
Yep.
And so Google bought it.
Yeah. And I mean, Google buying them, Google now being a large firm itself, having only been a startup only 10 or so years ago, represents the first wave of what's now a very strong wave of large established firms looking at the startup ecosystem as an R&D department, essentially. And again, we're talking about problems that are so large they impact very massive industries like transportation, like energy. So you're seeing more and more corporate initiatives around understanding startups, working with startups, acquiring them, investing in them so that, you know, they don't sort of, they won't in every case know which company is going to redefine their industry, but if they can just get a small piece of a few companies that might redefine the industry, then they don't completely miss the train. But policy's also been advancing. Our understanding of policy's been advancing thanks to the ecosystems of groups sharing information with each other. Things like, well, a lot of the challenge that you're going to end up looking at, what you'll realize is very often they lead to something physical in the world needing to be measured or needing to be moved or something being actuated on. Here too, building a solution that's based on hardware has been something that's very distant for most. But now there are, you know, a lot of education and support and funding to help folks along that route. We won't touch on building a hardware solution in this course. I won't dissuade anyone from like building a prototype of something cool. I'd love to play with it. But we will have one founder who has built a hardware startup, Tara Pham from CTY. So it'll be interesting to chat with her about how and why she decided to start a hardware company and the support that she's received from you know, various organizations. There are funds like us, and there are, you know, research labs out of schools, like, you know, Chicago has an urban research center. New York has a lot of very interesting projects, and the C40 and the work that Bloomberg Philanthropies does around understanding what's working in cities and sharing that between cities. All of that has been great for both unearthing and understanding the problem sets better, but also opening up opportunities for entrepreneurs to create the solutions. And we've been tracking as many of these entrepreneurs as possible, as many of these companies as possible. That number's just been growing every year. We've segmented them out through this hierarchy of needs, but also who their primary customer is. We try to identify where the gaps are, where people are missing opportunities, like, you know, resources, resource solutions being sold to cities, or you know, transportation solutions being sold to businesses. You know, we're trying to find where is it crowded and where are entrepreneurs missing the obvious opportunities and where are the bigger successes coming from. Obviously, business to consumer is a very popular category. It's generally lower hanging fruit to get something out in the world and test it with consumers, and when you're successful, it can be very big very quickly. It can get very big very quickly. We, out of the hundreds and hundreds of companies that we've looked at, we've invested in 24 of them. These are a few of the examples, and, you know, primarily they fall into the buckets that we originally highlighted around the hierarchy: transportation and logistics, resources and built environment, and civic and administration, more efficient government. So a few examples, a few of my favorite examples. You know, we met a team that had built this really funky self-driving electrical board vehicle. At first, we blew it off as a toy, like most people did, and then through a series of conversations with some of our, advisors and other founders, and really getting to understand the founders and what their broader vision is, which actually Kyle, the founder of One Wheel, originally coined the term Trojan horsing public benefits, which really helped us to label what we were doing all the while, which is finding fun ways to sneak public benefits into the world. And they've gone on to do very well. They're multi-million dollars in revenue only 2 years later, and launching a phenomenal new product this week. Ratio is another great example where most of the reviews you'll read on Amazon are people having fun squirting squirrels with their gardening system or playing with the kids. But when they're not monkeying around with their watering system, they're using Ratio to set their gardening based on actual weather conditions and actual conditions of their garden and their lawn, which is helping them save money and water. But again, it starts with just a great user experience and having fun with something that tends to not be so fun. But we also go, sort of out there to some degree on thinking about the future of transportation. We invested early on in a company called Skycatch, which a few years back had started using drones to help construction companies plan and monitor their building construction so that you can get more buildings built in the world. As Abby pointed out, we're building so many buildings now, particularly with the growth of China and India. I mean, China's building, I think, like a new Chicago every few weeks, if you can wrap your mind around that. But on the other side of the hierarchy of needs are helping each other. And with the demand on local government being harder or more tight, things like our neighbors in need or housing, and homelessness are also part of the equation. Again, if we want to have good density in cities, then we also need to solve some of the higher level needs of helping each other and the tide rising all. And of course, energy use, giving people comfort in their home, personalized comfort in their home, so that the energy savings is a secondary benefit. The primary benefit is you're not freezing your butt off just because your sister's in town and she needs the temperature at whatever 50 degrees to be comfortable, which was one of the inspirations for Dan to build this. I think Dan started Flare in Chicago. One of the first conversations I had with him was while he was packing his truck to move to the Bay Area before going to China to build out the first versions of this product. So I'll let Abby take it from here.
Okay.
We definitely have an awesome few weeks for you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
So